Good evening. What an amazing evening. It's so great to have you all here to celebrate Michele Oka Doner's exhibition that's opening this evening. And my name is Tobias Ostrander. I'm the Chief Curator and Deputy Director here at PAMM, and it's been just a wonderful journey with Michele, and I'm just so grateful to see such a turnout. I mean, she is a wonderful citizen of this city and takes such wonderful parts of our environment across the world with her, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But we're here to celebrate her exhibition, Michele Oka Doner, How I Caught a Swallow in Midair. And first, I want to thank the sponsors. Our presenting sponsor is Buccia Latte, and we thank you so much. We have a representative here, and they've been a wonderful partner on many projects. And of course, additional support from the Related Group. Our Jorge Perez is here from Related Group. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Related Group. Thank you. And additional support for the exhibition and a beautiful catalog that we produced for this was provided by Marlborough Gallery in New York, and also by George Lindemann as well, and we thank both of them. This exhibition really began several years ago, and it's been a really ongoing conversation between Michele and our former director, Tom Collins, who curated the exhibition. And the exhibition design was done by Matt Goodrich, who's here tonight, and I'd like to thank him for all his support. And the catalog we produced was designed by Beverly Joel, who's a wonderful designer and who we've worked with on all of our publications in an exciting way. And it has text by Tom Collins and Rebekah Rutkoff, who's here right here with us tonight. So thank you, all of you in that catalog. And then, of course, one of the reasons we scheduled this exhibition at this time was it's a wonderful complement to Michele's work at the ballet for Midsummer Night's Dream that just opened last weekend. And we're thrilled to have some of the dancers here tonight. Please join me in thanking these young ballerinas who are here with us this evening. There's Atlanta champion, Indigo, one at a time. Indigo Finlinson, Maya Jacobson, Renata Alvarez, Dasha Selivonenko, and Ella Simon. Thank you, guys. What beautiful costumes and wonderful poised figures. So thank you so much. Following tonight's discussion, there will be a book signing in the lower gallery with Michele. So and the catalogs will be available. I wanted to tell everyone you're welcome to sit on the stairs if you didn't get a seat, or down in the lower auditorium. We're projecting the discussion as well. So just to introduce the exhibition quickly, this exhibition is really a mini survey, or it has it's an exhibition that has examples of work from really the beginning of Michele's career up through the present, from really the 60s up to now. And I hope everyone's had a chance to see the show or can see it. It really becomes its own very magical environment. And the title of the exhibition, How I Caught a Swallow in Midair, it takes its title from a print that she produced of sort of something very fleeting that looks like it could be a swallow. And she talked about how trying to encompass or think about or contain such a large body of work is almost like an impossible task, trying to grasp at a swallow. It's something that is very poetic and fleeting in some way. And it's a very special exhibition. Tom Collins, who curated the show, was really struck by the experience of Michelle's studio in New York, because it's an environment where you walk in and you see her sculptures, her drawings, her works on paper, mixed with various collections of natural materials, ancient materials from all over the world. And it reminded him of a Wunderkamera, a Renaissance, kind of a proto-museum environment where philosophers and artists, they would mix many elements together. And that's what really inspired the show, and particularly the installation design. And it really creates this very magical environment that evokes the richness of Michelle's studio. I just wanted to mention briefly Rebekah Rutkoff, who's here with us and will be doing the interview with Michele. She did a wonderful essay in the catalog called Book of Nature, and she really captured a lot of the complexity and thinking in Michelle's work. And she's a writer and thinker, and she's the author of a very interesting book called The Irresponsible Magician: Essays and Fictions. She's a CUNY graduate, and she's currently in the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. She's working on several other publications related to cinema, psychoanalysis, but I'll let you take it from here, Rebekah. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you, Michele.
Well, thank you, Tobias, and thank you all for being here. It's really a thrill to be here in conversation with Michele Oka Doner in celebration of how I caught a swallow in midair, but especially so to be doing it in Miami, as you know, Michelle's birthplace, but also, as her fellow poet of Florida, Wallace Stevens, would say, the soil of her very particular and necessary form of intelligence and imagination. But of course, in Michelle's case, the soil here is as much the ocean as it is as the dirt. And as you know from Tobias and these beautiful ballerinas, the exhibition here comes just on the heels of her collaboration with the Miami City Ballet and her very fitting transport of Balanchine's A Midsummer Night's Dream into an underwater world. So it's really a kind of set of stunning back-to-back achievements in her native soil. I'm very grateful to former director Tom Collins for having introduced me to Michele and her work. And I have a very clear memory of leaving her combined studio and home in New York after meeting her for the first time. And the sensation of a subtle but very distinct kind of cellular change. And an aspirational sense of wanting to kind of bring the clarity of vision that I felt under the auspices of her presence with me back out into the world. I wanted it basically to be permanent. And it was a feeling that I encountered again yesterday. I visited the exhibition as Michele was installing it, and in one of the collections of found objects, this was a coral-themed one where the objects were red and orange. My eye was drawn to a very distinctly pink leaf that had yellow veins in it. And it was one of these, most ordinary but exquisite objects. And moments later, I left the museum and went out onto the sidewalk, and there was a pile of those very leaves that had fallen off a tree. And I realized that Michele, or I imagined at least, that Michele had perhaps found one outside the museum and brought it right in and added it to her exhibition. And so I think it's this very kind of heightened vision and release of poetic energy that becomes available to all of us under Michelle's very special tutelage. So with that, I want to turn to talking about the exhibition itself. So I think one of the really special qualities of the exhibition is the fact that we get to encounter some of Michelle's very earliest works. And we get to see a kind of embryonic announcements of themes and questions that will persist over the coming decades. So Michele, I wanted to start with the earliest work in the show, Volcanic Bowl from 1964. It's porcelain and iron oxide, and it feels kind of newly excavated, as if the dirt of the earth is really still on it, and the fissures in it are so intense that it seems miraculous that this form actually holds together. And I wondered if you could take us back a bit to the kind of teen, you were a teenager, to the teen consciousness that conceived of and produced this object, and also to the material terms of its making. How did you find a kiln in Michigan, and how did this happen?
I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and yay, there's several people here, yes. And there was a kiln. There was the School of Art, which was a wonderful experience. I knew Deco, I knew Morris Lapidus, but then I met Mies van der Rohe in the graffiti over the entrance to the school. It said, "Mies lives for you." So I asked somebody who came in, "Who's Mies? Mouse?" They said, "Oh, I didn't know who Mies van der Rohe was. I was 17. I learned pretty quickly. It was very rigorous, and my second year, 1964, my professor had come back from a Fulbright in Japan, and he was very interested in the notion of chance, of letting things happen. It was pretty wonderful. It was about the same time John Cage and Merce Cunningham were playing with chance. It was a moment in time, and Ann Arbor was one of those places where things want to happen. 1963, when I arrived, Tom Hayden had just left. The SDS was getting started. There was a music scene. It was really a wonderful period. So the door was open to explore. And even though that work, Volcanic Bowl, was not exactly my assignment, when I handed in a cracked piece, nobody said, "You got to be kidding," or "Where's the filler?" They said, well, what'd you do that for? But I see that when I look at it now, that my eyes were so used to embedding, to oolitic limestone, which has layer upon layer of sedimentary rock, of corals. So to begin embedding things within things, which of course ended up in the airport many years later, was a natural act.
And I imagine as you're talking about this discourse of chance, that at that moment, thinking about Cage and chance, that clay would not necessarily be the medium that chance would normally be thought to be sort of operating in a sort of art world situation. And I wondered, especially then, a few years later, you're in the MFA program at Michigan. What were the kind of aesthetic priorities that were prominent at that time?
It was clearly a moment of color field, big color canvases, welded I-beams. David Smith had a lot of influence. Targets like Kenneth Nolan's stripes and targets, like Frank Stella's work. I just wasn't interested in big color paintings. But they let me in the graduate school, and they told me not to ask any guy to help me lift things. So I was there was one other woman, and she was really very, she was much more avant-garde, let's say, than I was. So we had nude women models all through art school, but on Saturday morning, she had a nude male, and she held art class in her house. It was just a wonderful time to see things crumbling apart, rebuilding, but in a very lovely way. Ann Arbor was a happy place, not an angry place. So they used to say to me, they liked me, I was affable enough, so they didn't say, "What are you doing?" They said, "Michele, why don't you get with the program?" And I would just smile back, and it was really fun and a great time. I didn't feel challenged in a negative way. I felt challenged very purposefully. And my freshman drawing teacher was Alvin Loving Jr., and he was the first, black artist I met, and he was painting, this is so significant, he was painting big color cubes, and I thought, why is he doing that? That's like New York school. He's here in Michigan, he's not there, what is going on? So I began to learn the idea there was a formal, quote-unquote, discourse. Years later, David Keel, who's the curator at the Whitney of Prince, but was formerly at the Metropolitan Museum, said to me that Ann Arbor, where we went to school, we were taught through materials. And at Yale and other schools in the East, they were taught through theory. So he said, that's why the Metropolitan fired me. I was a materials person, and I said, well, I guess I am too, even though I went and found my own theories. So it was really pretty interesting to have been taught through my fingers and through all of my senses.
Wow. Well, I think it was only 4 years later, and I think now, toward the end of your MFA stint at Michigan, that you made Tattooed Doll from 1968, also porcelain and iron oxide. And one of the show is so interestingly installed that one of the things I experienced as I moved through it is that as I encounter a particular work, it becomes the kind of central pulse for me of the show. In other words, my sense of the continuity of some of the aesthetic and thematic priorities of the show kind of reorder themselves based on that work. So when I encounter Tattooed Doll, because of the way it's installed, you kind of have to stand behind it or to the side of it. You can't walk right up to it. And there's something very compelling, I think, about the back of the body, because of course we can't see it, and it's such a particular zone of the body. And there, of course, is the spiral motif that's also elsewhere on that form. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about the spiral, which shows up so prominently in this exhibition.
I think I saw a lot of spiral forms, even vines. Moving up trees is a spiral in space, a helix. The use of iron is in the first bowl, the volcanic bowl. I used a lot of iron always, iron oxides. They burned so beautifully, they gave a sense of the earth. Years later, a friend of mine sent me a poem that she knew I would like. It was by Philip Levine, and it was called The Poem of Chalk, and it was about materials and about compression, which was so much of what I was working with and so much of what that piece is about. And there was a few lines in there about in the poem of Chalk, about a man who was holding a stick of chalk, and it said, he knew calcium, he knew feldspar, oyster shells. He knew the tiny creatures that gave their spines to become the dust time pressed into these perfect cones. And I feel that is how these pieces are made. You have materiality, and then you apply all kinds of pressure, a physical pressure, a psychic pressure, and all pressures. And that is how it happens, just like that. It happens in chalk, in art, in poetry. And by the way, feldspar is one of the major ingredients in all those pieces.
Wow.
It's kaolin, it's feldspar. 50 years ago, you couldn't order clay up in a bag and have it delivered. And my teacher came from Cranbrook, and he'd been taught by Maya Grotel, and she came from Finland with Saarinen. And so it was pretty rigorous. You had to mix your own clay body, and you better know what you're doing, because if you had too much of a flux and it melted on the shelf, you would be thrown out of class. It was kind of scary every time they opened the kiln. It's like, what happened, you know? It was also very exciting. You had to mix your own glazes, and you learned what things did. And one of the most exciting moments I had, there was an ingredient called bentonite, and it always was 3%. So I'm reading John McPhee's book, I think it was Basin and Range, and it was about geology and traveling, and about a geologist who went west in a covered wagon, and how when it rained, the earth there had so much bentonite in it that it swelled and caught the wheels of the wagons, and that's when the Native Americans knew we could go get them. But meanwhile, it's like, that's what bentonite does. It holds the glaze to the pot, and when it goes in the kiln, that's why it doesn't just sort of flake off. So I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me back. So all of the work, all of the making of things, the process, has these joyful connections to everything else. It's not as isolated and abstract at all as one might think. And it has many tendrils, is how I would explain it.
Well, I think one of the pleasures of that many tendriledness is that, you know, when one speaks to Michele, you know, one quickly learns how deeply fluent she is in many of the worlds of these kinds of connectednesses. So she's able to speak about, you know, the amino acids, you know, on the moon's, in how would you say it? On the moon, in the moon?
Yes,
Yeah,
so the moon rocks.
Moon rocks, and that, you know, we share these elemental forms in our own bodies, but on another level, in a way that's, you know, accessible to me as a viewer. When I look at that tattooed doll, I see suddenly in its pockmarkedness such kinship, just visibly at least, to coral. I mean,
Yes.
it really, something about a kind of triangulation between a primitive mark-making tool and the pockedness of coral, and then this doll. So I think that you make that connectedness available even when we don't have a kind of the scientific fluency that you might have. It operates, I think, on different levels.
Well, I got myself into it this time because I'm lecturing or the keynote speaker for a brain mapping conference, and I had to go into Wikipedia to find out what brain mapping was. I'm still not sure, and I've had about 10 days. So.
Well, I have confidence that you'll figure it out.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah,
I guess,
yeah.
but
Well,
yes.
as Tobias invoked, I mean, one of the really most transfixing parts of visiting Michele's studio and home is encountering these incredible constellations of combined found and made objects that cover nearly every tabletop and surface. And, you know, these are combinations of shells and pods and seeds and wasps' nests and apple seeds and blossoms and ancient hieroglyphic tablets and bird skulls and on and on and on. But there's also a kind of incredible present tenseness in the way that as you're moving through a space with Michele, she might kind of do some reordering based on her sudden sense of why two forms might go together. And even in the show here, you'll see in one of those constellations a small glass tube. And Michele announced yesterday, she had just found a flying ant in her studio hours before, and she caught it with some honey, and she put it in a glass tube, and there it is in the show. So there's this incredible kind of present tense flux and formation of these groupings. And one of the beautiful aspects of the show is the capacity for us to see the kind of formal works side by side with these collections. And I guess I was curious how you understand the distinction between kind of formal, titled, catalogable work and these other kinds of groupings. Is it an important distinction? Is it?
For me, it's not that important, but I recognize that it is important to academics, to curators. And so I try to pay attention. So Tom and I came up with the notion, he wanted all these things. He actually said, the first time we discussed an exhibition, everything in here is going to be gone. It's going to be empty. So I said, all right, and then when it came down to it, he said that we were going to give the registrar here a nervous breakdown, and let's see how we can do this. So we came up with a shadow exhibition that we would bother the registrar with about, we think we have 39 objects, things, and then he said, can you pack some boxes and we'll just send them along too? I said, sure. And that was a lot of fun. So, and he hasn't seen yet. He left before we opened the boxes. I was very happy about that too, because, I've never put work on pedestals. This was a noble experiment. And I had a one-person show at the Detroit Institute of Art in 1978. In the North Court, I laid everything out like an archaeological site, and show before that also. So this was trying to make a world that mitigated some formal aspects of museum culture and my own way of living, where if it's interesting, it's in front of me, and I don't care if it's at a desk or a table, or in the fruit bowl, or crawling out of wood. But that's sometimes, my son one night came for dinner, and he said, what's that? Oh, that's a red ant. Where's it coming from? That wood, I'm going to cast it in bronze. They're going to pick it up. I have to clean it. There's another one. I said, oh, yes, they go to the window. They like the light. He got up. He walked over. He said, Mom, I think you're crazy. There's a nest in there. He said, Dad, get the dolly. We're getting it out. I said, you can't do that. It was just shipped up. It's got to go to the foundry. So he turned to me. He said, it's going out the door. Maybe they'll freeze. So when he left, I made Fred go back and bring it back up. And I sprayed it with Raid, and it was really, it gets very exciting. So do I make a distinction? It's all from a piece. It's like that wonderful poem of Chalk. It's all for compression, made into something. I think the process of transformation is what I really like, and maybe the title is about not catching something really and always jumping for it, and that is the excitement and the drama and the aspiration, I think, of an artist.
Mm-hmm. But I guess it strikes me that aside from, I hear what you're saying about the kind of demands of art historians and curators and the need to know what's in the catalog and not, but on the other hand, in pieces particularly like Seeds and Pods and Pictographs, which are collections of raku and clay objects, that there we maybe get the clearest sense, especially in the exhibition as it's laid out, of the relationship between these collected forms and then the ones that are sculpted by you. I mean, because there's an incredible collection of maybe over 100 what Michele calls glyphs, and these are kind of eroded by water forms, shells and pieces of coral. So everything has that rounded edge of erosion, but at the same time, everything is on the verge of kind of recognizability. So these are torsos and letters and other forms kind of in formation. And then to kind of go from that to pictographs, which is, of course, invoking that early, form of writing when there was a merger between picture and word. That to me feels like a real kind of direct a direct movement, from...
It is a translation, but what's so interesting about the glyphs, which are all found objects that become a work of art, is a wonderful book, The Art of Sculpture, Sir Herbert Reed. It's an old classic, is that a chapter in there called The Amulet in the Monument. And what he said, sculpture began with the amulet in the monument. What is it? It's that object, that stone that looked like maybe a buffalo that, somebody picked up and put in their pouch, or a branching coral that looked like a tree. Everybody's seen those and stopped and picked one up. And then the monument was our ancestors took it back and put it in the cave. And if the cave had a niche, he said there was your first altar. So I think my practice encompasses that. And I see that the found objects, quote unquote, the glyphs, I could expand that, I said to Tobias this afternoon, into a whole plinth. Forget all the rest of this stuff. Why didn't you let me loose to, just beachcomb for a year? So I don't have hierarchy. I have the urge and the impulse to continue to work in a way that seems natural to me. And I think that has just been amazing that I've been able to maintain it and also produce things, as I also said to Tobias, that they call art, quote unquote. So there's no word for art in Japanese, just like the Eskimos have 10 words for ice and snow. And the Scandinavians, what is art to them? And it's the understanding of what it is and what it is universally. It's much broader than something in a frame and something, an object. And yes, that's something also, but it's not all of it.
Yeah.
So the scope, I guess, of what I live in is some part of it. Or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
That sense, too.
Yes. Well, speaking of glyphs and the pictographs, something to me that's so, I've tried to think a lot about, but it remains kind of mysterious in your work to me, is the role of language, which is both so latent in the work. There's maybe a couple of letters that you'll see in the show. But it's latent and yet so deeply present. And I wondered if you could kind of talk about that tension or that kind of cohabitation.
Well, language I was taught was a privilege, really. It's what makes us what we are. Most creatures don't have their brain evolved to communicate the way we have learned to, and it's a privilege. So even a chair makes you sit up, you hold your head, you can speak. That's from an Arthur Danto wonderful essay called The Seat of the Soul. And it's a wonderful thinking process. Also, Stephen Jay Gould gave a great lecture on language and how it evolved many years ago, and I still think about that. That said, my mother was a linguist, and she was very articulate, and we were expected as children not only to eat our dinner at the table, but to speak about what happened during the day, to sit up straight. She was strict. She'd been a Latin teacher, and even though she didn't teach that long, she brought these ideas and this way of living. So language was always present. The idea of many languages, the Tower of Babel, the myth was always so fascinating. And she came from a family of scribes, so writing and handwriting was also very important. Now, you look at today, and it's so different, and yet I think that the iPad that kids have and the internet, it's made a more level playing field, and more people are looking at symbolic language again, and I like that as well. So I don't have any feelings that something's been lost. How's that? I feel language is an evolutionary situation, and it will keep moving.
But it also, it seems that taxonomy for you is something that can both be kind of scientific and codified and deeply personal and imaginative, that you have both expertise literally in species of plants and so on and so forth, but that also so much of your work is about the creation of kind of personal taxonomy. I know that in the exhibition you have kind of groupings of found objects based on your own kind of categories. I can't remember, archaeological core.
Oh, that was Tom. Tom made categories.
Okay.
He's a curator.
Tom's taxonomy, we'll call it, yeah.
He gave me 5 categories, but that was pretty good because then I knew what he had on his mind. And then I could respond in a way that was gentle and not going to hurt his feelings when he came down to see the exhibition. His categories were archaeological, glyphs, like studio material, and then I have wax objects, and I forget what the 5th was at this moment. It's in there. So, and I forgot what the 5th was today. I had to remind myself and read it, and I forget again. But I did that, but they're all mixed up.
Yeah.
You know, because they're not interesting unless they're in relationship to something else. So also those red leaves, when Tom and I installed the first day, I didn't know he wasn't a walker. He's in such great shape. So I said, Tom, you know, I'm on Sunset Island number 3. Why don't we walk from the museum over Venetian Causeway? And, you know, he said, sure. So he said, how long does it take? I said, I don't know. No, it's 5 o'clock now. The staff left. You know, we'll be. My sister was making us dinner. I said, we'll just do this. Oh, great idea. Then Matt told me 2 days ago that he didn't walk. I said, what? So we walked and we found things which are in the exhibition. And I showed him what oolitic limestone was, and I said, imagine this is the aquifer. I found a piece of the aquifer holding us up. We had laughed at all the holes in it. You know, we had such a good walk, it took us 2.5 hours. I had to call my sister and tell her to turn the temperature down on the potatoes. So that's where we saw it, and what you saw were grape leaves, which is one of our native plants. Ah. But he's been here 5 years. He lived here. I don't think he ever said hello to a grape leaf before. He's sea grape, yes.
He's still working on the sort of nature culture dichotomy. Yeah. I'm interested in the notion of the hybrid, which shows up in so many different ways in your work. There's a piece called Morning Staff from 2015, bronze and silver wash, which, as I understand it, is a kind of wholly invented form, kind of a composite of different kinds of plants. And I wondered if you could just speak a bit about your interest in the hybrid as it exists, both kind of in nature. I mean, coral itself is a hybrid form, but also in terms of art making.
Well, I think today everything's a hybrid. You know, you look at dogs and you say, what's that? You know, and it's a labradoodle or something. I think everybody's messing with everything. And so my practice is just ahead of its time, and, you know, and taking strange things and putting them together. And now I have one thing. I made a bee, and it really looks like a bee, except that I took the body from a Dieffenbachia, a big plant. And you'd swear it was a bee, but how did you find a bee that large? So I always wondered, when you look at your hand, there's veins, then you look at a leaf, there's veins, then you go up in an airplane and you see the rivers. So, you know, you don't have to be too conscious. You can be 4 or 5 years old and understand there's something else working. So that's always interested me, and I have taken the liberty to do it myself, but that's partially probably why I chose to be an artist and not a school teacher. Because, you know, you have to teach math the way it is, or the world would fall apart. Clearly, I wasn't meant to be an engineer.
And am I right to think that the kind of intertidal zone, which I associate you with so much, I mean, I know a lot that you do a lot of walking on the beach, and that's where a lot of your discoveries come, but that itself is such a zone of hybridity and thinking about species that go from, breathing underwater to breathing air. And
Most interesting place in the world is where water meets land. It's just the littoral zone, and I love it. And there's one piece in the exhibition, Sargassa, the goddess, that was from seaweed, from Sargassum Sea, which is right out of right out on our doorstep there. And it's so golden, so beautiful. It has these little balls that allow it to float. And I always speculated that those were the beginning of lungs. We came out of the same place. And those little things hold air, our lungs. Where did they develop from? So you could be playing, as we did at the beach in the summers, and digesting literally, a year of school when we did. There was no television in the early days. And there wasn't that much to do without, no, I'm teasing. There was a lot to do without television. But we did look at the stars. We did stay at the beach late. It's a different life. But today they have Google. They can answer the questions, we speculated on. It's also, I never feel it was better. I always feel it keeps getting better. We keep evolving, and I have a great sense of that, and it's a very positive feeling.
As you're talking about that importance of the water's edge, I'm thinking now of the British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, for whom the water's edge was a really important sort of psychic metaphor, that this was the place of the deepest kind of maternal infantile play and potential integration. And
It's true.
Do you think there's a kind of psychic element there as well?
Well, I think too, when you're at the water's edge, you're looking out, and you have the notion of the horizon. You also have the notion of infinity, which is pretty big to grasp. Especially here in Florida, it's not even like a lake. I mean, so you're facing what? It's so incredible to have that. It's so beautiful. And then seeds wash up. And years later, I found a little book on the seeds, and some of them come, and they showed the currents. Some of them come from the Amazon. Some of them come from Venezuela. Some of them come from the Canary Islands. I mean, I found these things. Oh, that was the other category. Seeds, the fifth category. Very good.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. And there's an installation of seeds. I do think that was Tom's favorite.
Oh.
And we found several. We found Australian pine when we walked. We found zamia seeds. We found cycads. We, took 2.5 hours. Now, if I was doing it by myself, it might have been an hour. But, we looked for mangroves. We actually saw the most wonderful Miami moment. We went across the causeway past the guardhouses, and there in the water was a mermaid, a siren. She was actually a homeless woman with a very tan body and beautiful graying hair, still very thick. And she saw that we saw her, and we smiled at her, and she smiled at us, and then we waved, and she waved back. And it was just really amazing to see her taking her bath at, 6 o'clock in the evening. And in Biscayne Bay.
She's like one of your goddesses.
She was a goddess.
Yeah.
Really, there's these sirens, they're still around,
Yeah. Like Aphrodite rising
Like
from...
Aphrodite, she was a real Aphrodite. So we almost made my sister burn the dinner,
It seems to be a theme. We got to worry about dinner, yeah.
Getting to that dinner,
Yeah.
it was really nice. So
Well,
Tom is so intense, that was so funny to deconstruct him.
another a kind of zone of distinction that you seem to ignore is between functionality and art objects. And you spoke before a bit about chairs, and there's a variety of pieces in the show, Burning Bush, Magnifier, which is made of bronze and glass from '96, some chairs, and then also a variety of vessels and containers. And I wondered if you could speak about that refusal of distinction, and also the capacity of functional objects to catalyze a kind of shift of consciousness about ordinary activity.
I think they do. I realized that when I had my first house and I needed fireplace tools, and I went to the hardware store and they all had duck heads, and I didn't want them. And then I was poking the fire with wood sticks, and someone came by and said, "You're going to burn your house down one day." So I cast those sticks into bronze, and that's how it began. And then I went to Easter Island, and they were serving food in the most beautiful way with their hands, but was a body gesture, really beautiful. And I thought about how we had this little wrist gesture with these little dumb spoons, and I thought it was so Victorian of us. So I made a spoon that was the size of my hand, and I made the handle going to my elbow. I made 75 of them. I sold them all. People, it's like, "Oh, that's a great idea." And it was a great idea. It involved the body, it involved the notion of giving and ceremony. So all of those objects, except for the ones with the thorns, But like these chairs, I was thinking, these are ridiculous chairs. These aren't functional. My chairs are more functional. You can sit up in them, and they're more comfortable than these. These are like, I don't know, these are like potato chairs or something. So who says what's functional? How's that?
Right.
Maybe sitting on the floor with our legs crossed would have been more functional this evening than these with a pillow or something like that. Are you comfortable, Rebekah? Yeah.
40%.
Yeah.
40%.
40%, you see. So, to question functionality is like, who says? So,
Right.
yes.
Well, that functionality also, in a sense, morphs a bit in the show, because you have these functional vessels, but then that sense of vessel for me also traveled with me to the non-functional objects, and even some of the large figures which are partially hollow inside and have crevices so that one can look inside. And I began to see so much of your work as having a kind of vessel-like containing function. Is that something you're conscious of? Or?
I am. I think, we spend a lot of hours doing certain things. You may as well amuse yourself. You may as well make them interesting instead of plastic. So, and then I did a project for friends, and I called it the Shaman's Hut. So I was working on a book, and my husband said, "What exactly is a shaman?" I said, "Go to Wikipedia and you tell me." So the second line was, "For the shaman, everything is alive." And I said, "That's it. That's exactly it." So there it is. For me, everything's alive. It's not just, I want to touch it, I want to feel it. I want to be alive. So why divide function, which you do every day, like so many hours a day, into why set it aside and then hang one piece of art on the wall? It doesn't make any sense. It's like everything should be as much as it can be, and that's how we should live. If we should make our environments, and I think that's happening today. I think the rise of design. 50 years ago, if you would have said to me, "What's design?" I couldn't give you a good definition, even though I was in the School of Architecture and Design. I didn't know what they were doing in graphic design. This is, again, something that's become more interesting as we have become more visually literate as a culture.
Well, this is sort of good news. I mean, I tend to associate your work with a kind of, speaking of the shaman, I wanted to ask you about your own identification with the shaman, and a question about sort of what is the 21st century wound, or what are the set of wounds that we need kind of curative help with. And I tend to sort of, think about ushering ourselves back to some pre-industrial moment, but I'm pleased to hear that you feel optimistic about these 21st century changes.
Oh, change is always wonderfully and deliciously uncertain, but that's very stimulating. If you know everything, you may as well just, park yourself in bed. So it's the changes that coming are wonderful in that we have never had so much understanding of what's ahead, so much in our ability to see, and like the computer-generated models right now that are alerting us to the climate change, for example. We are the first generation, the first people ever to know when a hurricane is coming. Before, the wind would stir up and people would say, gee, it's going to be a big storm, I think I'll go indoors. You read Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. It was about that 1926 hurricane. They didn't know it was coming. They all got blown away. They didn't have time to do anything. So technology has helped us live in a more determined and deliberate way. It has, like everything else, it has side effects, and then, something's born to help modify it. So
Sure.
It's a process, it's a dialectic. One step backwards, two step forwards. I think that's the way of the world.
Well, I know we're running out of time, and I want to give you a chance to ask Michele a couple of questions. So maybe I will end on a note of yet another gift from Michele, which was her introduction of me to a southern Mexican chantress and shaman named Maria Sabina. And she kind of channeled the voices of children and spoke and sang chants. And I want to just read you a brief excerpt, which I think speaks to the core of some of Michele's many gifts. So Maria said, "I am a sap woman, a dew woman. I am a fresh woman, a woman of clarity. I am a woman of light, a woman of the day. I am a woman who looks into the insides of things. I am a woman who investigates. Because I can swim in the immense, because I can swim in all forms, because I am the launch woman, because I am the sacred opossum, because I am the Lord opossum." So with that.
She said that? That's great. That's so great. Thank you, Rebekah. What a great thing. That's so great.
Yes, no, she spent a lot of time underwater in her imagination. So,
That's
so let's open it up. Are there any questions for Michele?
Recording, so if you could just wait for a mic for questions.
Who's that?
I enjoyed your exhibit immensely, and I'm asking, what was the recording playing, and how did you choose it? There was music in the background.
Oh, the music. That was I commissioned after seeing Werner Herzog's The Cave of Dreams. I don't know how many of you saw it. I heard there was a bone from a huge bird, and they had drilled, the ancient people who used the cave had drilled holes in it and made it into a flute. So the archaeologists that had been interviewed by Werner Herzog then went and changed into skins and came back and gave us a flute concert. So I walked out of that movie and I said, I don't want to photograph the rest of Miami Airport. Everything's moving. I want to make something moving, and I want a shell blower. So someone in my studio, Carlos Rodriguez, said, I saw one on the subway the other day. It was William Cepeda. He said, I think I can get his cell phone number for you. So that's what I went to Puerto Rico. Even I called him, he said, well, what do you want from me? I said, a song. I said, I want a song from your shells. So I went down, and it was 4 generations of shell blowers. I met his family. I saw shells, and we got together in a garage to do this recording. And all day went by and nothing happened because no one showed up till it got dark, and then it rained. It was just really a great, crazy day. By midnight, that's what I had, and I love it. It's so ethereal and haunting and beautiful, and the shell, the listening to that shell is so wonderful. So that's what it is. It's an original composition for a walk on the beach. And it went to the wall at Art Basel when they had the first year of videos on the wall at the New World Symphony. So I turned it into art. How's that?
Anyone else?
So thank you for coming.
Well, with that, thank you so much. Thank you to Michelle, and
So good.
enjoy the exhibition.